Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fall 2020 Indian Point Regional Decommissioning Forum. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colin Smith. I am the Westchester County Legislator for District 1, where the Indian Power Plant is located. The Indian Point Power Plant, that is. So with the impending closure of the second reactor coming up in April of 2021, concerns regarding energy source replacement, loss of jobs and tax revenue, economic development, spent fuel rod storage, and the like are looming larger than ever now. I would like to first thank our state and local officials, our community members, our local business leaders, our environmental activists, as well as our friends in labor for your ongoing efforts to support our community through this challenging time of transition. As you know, the NRC recently approved the sale of Indian Point to Holdtech. And at such a critical moment, such a move does raise concerns about the transparency of the decommissioning process moving forward. With that in mind, myself and my partners in state and local government will continue to hold those involved accountable and work together to ensure everyone's safety and push for a fair and transparent process. Now, I would like to introduce, as moderator of this event, my longtime friend and mentor, as well as my colleague on the Westchester County Board of Legislators, who has been an advocate for our community and an active part of this process from the very beginning, the Honorable County Legislator, Catherine Borgia.
Thank you, Colin, for that nice introduction, and welcome to our second decommissioning forum. Now we have to do the brave new world of technology, but we know that we have about 180 people on this call participating, which is wonderful because one of the things we have learned from communities that have gone through a decommissioning process is that the more people who are informed and active, the better. So I'm just going to say a few housekeeping notes. We do have many elected officials on this call, unfortunately too many to name by individually, but I do want to mention that Mayor Teresa Knickerbocker, who is the mayor of Buchanan, where the Indian Point facility is located, is with us. We're going to go through several sections. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. You should do that in the Q&A function on your screen. We will try to get to as many as possible. We're going to have a brief question period after every section, and then we have a much greater extended Q&A section that Manager Green and I will moderate. So please write down your questions as we go along. We'll get to as many of them as we can in the time allotted. We will also be emailing answers to questions that we received in the sign-up process, as well as some other questions to everyone who has signed up. So you're going to be getting a lot of information both at this forum and subsequent to this forum. One other note that our webmaster who is running this forum can switch to speaker mode, which is what you see now with my face as speaker mode. If you desire to see all of the speakers at the upper right-hand part of your screen, you can switch to gallery. That's especially probably what you'd like to do during the Q&A portion. Okay, so let's get kicked off. The first part of our day is going to be an update on the Indian Point license transfer. You heard that the NRA has approved the sale, but it is not completely over yet. The first person who's going to speak on this matter is Richard Webster, who is the staff attorney for environmental legal director for Riverkeeper. He's also had a lot of experience litigating decommissioning issues, including the relicensing of the Oyster Creek nuclear power plant and a lot of other issues regarding Indian Point. So we're going to switch over right now to Richard Webster to begin our forum.
Thank you, Catherine, and it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon, or to be wherever we are. Ben, you want to put the slides up? I think I'm going to do, first of all, just some intro on what the license transfer process is all about. So basically, Entergy is seeking to transfer the license over to Holtec, and to do that, they need a number of approvals. Can you give me the next slide, Ben? Ben, can you give me the next slide? Maybe not. So, while the slide, here we go. So basically, So basically, to transfer a license, a number of approvals are needed. The first one is done by the NRC staff in accordance to the regulations at least. The idea is that they give a contingent approval that is subject to a later commission decision. So the reason has to be this way is because there's a right in the Atomic Energy Act for a hearing, and the NRC has managed to work it so that they believe they can approve a transfer conditionally and then fix any problems later that come up in the hearings. We contest that, but that matter remains to be adjudicated. So after the staff has made its contingent approval decision, then the NRC, the commission itself, adjudicates what are called contentions. Contentions are formal submissions of issues that need to be addressed that have not been addressed by the application. And then there's also a state process, which is the Public Service Commission. And again, there's some question about this. Entergy has suggested that the PSC may not have jurisdiction. We strongly believe that they do have jurisdiction. And I think most people believe that because the NRC clearly doesn't regulate every aspect of decommissioning. And so therefore, the PSC should have jurisdiction to deal with both non-safety and non-radiological aspects of the decommissioning, such as financial assurance and the non-radiological cleanup, as well as actually the radiological cleanup. So those are the three processes that are ongoing. Let's see where we are. Next slide, Ben. So the NRC staff last week has proposed to issue its approval unless the commission intervenes before Monday, I believe, that approval will go through. I want to stress that's a contingent approval, and even the NRC itself said that approval could be undone. Local towns and ourselves, Riverkeeper, have filed contentions that remain pending. Josh Tallant's here from the AG's office. He'll describe the AG contention, which was largely similar to the town's contention and focused on financial aspects. As we'll see in a little bit, Riverkeeper, we focus primarily on the character and the trustworthiness of the applicant, Holtec, and made, I think, a very compelling case that Holtec is not a trustworthy entity to be charged with a difficult and dangerous job of decommissioning and take over $2 billion of taxpayer funds in the decommissioning trust fund. In terms of the PSC, that process is going pretty slowly. It's taken public comment, but I'm missing a note here, but it has not commenced the hearing process as of yet. And we wait to see when the PSC will commence that hearing process. Is the next slide, Ben? So our contention is that Holtec is not a suitable licensee. It has a record of bribes, lies, and disregard of the law. For example, when Holtec was getting started, its CEO, Chris Singh, was directly involved in a bribery scandal, bribing TVA officials for a contract. That led to a suspension of contracting with TVA for a while. Subsequently, a couple of years ago, Holtec lied under oath about this matter, this bribery scandal with the TVA, to obtain tax breaks in New Jersey, which have now been suspended pending investigation. And in fact, we believe that with that, because that was an intentional misrepresentation under oath, that there is a criminal investigation going on with regard to Holtec in New Jersey. Holtec also lied to the NRC and the state of New Mexico regarding mineral rights under a proposed spent fuel storage area, and covered up a number of things at the San Onofre nuclear plant, including it made a design change to a cask, which it didn't disclose, and it was involved in the cover-up of a canister drop where some pretty significant errors were made, which everybody agrees were safety significant. And finally, or among the other things, at Oyster Creek, which is a nuclear power plant in New Jersey, Holtec disregarded a stop work order from the municipality and force the municipality to go forward and get an injunction from the court before Holtec would stop work. And this is sort of the latest example of a history of conduct where Holtec appears to believe it's above the law and can do what it wants to improve its bottom line. Next slide, please, Ben. So we have a number of other issues. As I said, the AG in the town's focused on financial issues. We share those concerns, which are, multiple. There's a $2 billion trust fund here. It is supposed to be dedicated for decommissioning. And decommissioning here means the dismantling of the reactors and taking the reactor and basically taking it away and putting the site back to how it started. But it does not include what's called site restoration, which is cleanup, and it most importantly does not include spent fuel management. That's something that's supposed to be taken care of by the licensee. Now, what Holtec has proposed, straight away you see that there's a huge amount of money being dedicated to purposes that are not for the money's not designed for. Adding insult to injury, the financial projections are extremely rosy, and it appears that Holtec worked back from the amounts available to come up with the costs. So it appears to us that these cost projections are extremely uncertain and at best very optimistic. There's therefore a real risk. Well, let me just say this. Holtec is bringing no capital to the table whatsoever. And the transaction is structured so that Holtec International, the parent entity, takes no risk because it basically has the ability to put the decommissioning in the hands of an LLC, and then if the LLC runs out of money, then the LLC can go bankrupt and have no claim on the parent entity. Now, the extraction of the money for spent fuel management is made even more egregious by the fact that generally licensees get reimbursed for spent fuel management by the federal government. And so what we would expect is that Holtec will make a claim against the federal government for this $700 million. If they do that as Holtec International rather than as the LLC, then they may be able to move this money from the LLC to the parent and basically make a huge windfall profit. So one thing that we asked for, and I think it's really a de minimis ask, is that any money that's recovered from the feds comes back and is actually used for decommissioning purposes. But as far as we can tell, Holtec has made no assurances on that subject, and has basically so far shaped up to the money as far as we is called SLN, Canadian company. It has serious details of SNC routing $50 million to Colonel Gaddafi's son in exchange for a contract. Can I have the next slide, please, Ben? So on this long list of things that we are concerned about, the plan for decommissioning is extremely vague. The theory of the NRC regulatory regime is that the licensee puts in a plan for decommissioning, and then that plan forms the basis of regulation. But because the plan is so vague, it's going to be very hard for the NRC to use this plan as a basis for regulation. For example, the plan says barges may be used, more things may need to be done, but it doesn't give any it doesn't, first of all, it doesn't even decide. Oh, I see that I'm freezing. So let me turn off my video and hopefully that will clear up a little bit. So the plan is very vague, doesn't even say if barges will be used, let alone whether those barges will require dredging or whether they can clear bridges and all that kind of stuff. There are no plans at the moment for active cleanup of groundwater. There's contaminated groundwater under the site, contamination of both cobalt and strontium, radioactive cobalt and strontium, plus multiple non-radiological contaminants. And so that groundwater is going to need to be cleaned up. Holtec has very little experience in decommissioning and is taking on multiple reactors at the same time. Basically, it appears that Holtec is learning on the job, which isn't adequate for a decommissioning entity. And finally, Holtec showed no respect for workers and has brought in non-union workers at Oyster Creek at times. Chris Singh a while back made, the CEO of Holtec made some very derogatory statements about workers in New Jersey. And sorry, I'm hearing a echo here. Basically said that the workers in the Holtec factory in Camden were lazy and didn't do a good job, which reflects more on the management, we believe, than the workers. So that's a broad summary. The bottom line is that we believe that Holtec is not the right entity for this job. It's not an entity you want to trust $2 billion to, and it shows no signs of capability of doing the job adequately. The danger if we transfer the license to Holtec is that we'll end up with a half-done job, it'll be done badly, and the money will be frittered away on things that it's not supposed to be, like spent fuel management. So thanks for your time, thanks for listening, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for outlining these serious concerns. Next up, we are going to have Josh Talent, who, as was discussed already, is from the New York Attorney General's office, and just discuss their general contention letter to the NRC. Josh.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Richard covered a lot of ground, so I'll just focus briefly on the state's contentions as submitted to the NRC in a petition to intervene in the license transfer proceedings and for a hearing also. So let me say first that state supports prompt, thorough, and safe decommissioning at Indian Point. That said, the state is concerned that the Holtec LLCs may lack the financial wherewithal to complete a project of this complexity. Our concerns are essentially twofold. First, that Holtec's decommissioning cost estimate actually underestimates the likely costs of decommissioning, spent fuel management, and site restoration at Indian Point, which is essentially a funding assurance problem. And second, that the LLCs themselves lack the financial ability to absorb any cost overruns that might occur in the course of the project, which is a financial qualification problem. So taking the funding assurance issue first, the state takes issue with the Holtec cost estimate in a number of ways, all of which we've explained in detail in our petition. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. First of all, Indian Point has a long history of both radiological and non-radiological releases to the environment, most notably from leaking spent fuel pools. Holtec's failure to completely characterize the site and its reluctance to include what the state views as a reasonable contingency in its cost estimates both increases the likelihood that it's underestimating the types and amounts of contamination it will need to remediate, and also the cost to do the work. Relatedly, the Holtec cost estimates fail to account for the cost associated with satisfying stricter state law site remediation standards. NRC regulations only require that the licensees remediate radiological contamination to a 25 millirem threshold. But when the State Public Service Commission approved Con Edison's sale of Unit 1 and Unit 2 to Entergy in 2000, it ordered Entergy to comply with New York's stricter 10 millirem guidance value. Holtec's cost estimates don't appear to acknowledge this obligation or the cost associated with it. On the topic of spent nuclear fuel, Holtec offers no support for its assumption that the US Department of Energy will begin taking title to Indian Point's spent fuel in 2030, which is 9 years from now. There's no plan for a deep geologic repository. And in fact, federal law, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, currently bars DOE from transferring spent fuel to an interim repository, be it public or private. That means Holtec is likely to incur significant spent fuel management costs for far longer than it currently anticipates. Regardless of when DOE ultimately takes title to the fuel, Holtec's cost estimates also fail to include the costs of repackaging spent fuel for delivery to DOE, as currently required under DOE's standard contract with all the utility owners. Lastly, Holtec also suggests an aggressive time frame for certain key portions of the project, including reactor segmentation, particularly in view of the delays already announced at the Pilgram plant in Massachusetts. Delay at this critical early stage in the process could dramatically increase project costs. So, turning to the sort of second movement of the state's petition, financial qualification, the state is concerned that the Holtec LLCs simply lack the financial ability to hold the Indian Point licenses. Richard touched on this, but if the NRC approves the license transfer, these newly formed limited liability companies would bear the entire risk of decommissioning Indian Point without access to any funding other than the monies currently in the trust funds. That is, no access to parent company financing, no access to a revenue stream generated by operating power plants, no access to ratepayer funding. These are merchant plants. If the decommissioning trust proved inadequate, there is no reason to believe that the LLCs would be able to make up any shortfall, which they would be required to do under NRC regulations. So given that the NRC itself has admitted that it lacks legal ability to shift unmet decommissioning costs to a non-licensee corporate parent, no matter how well funded, the state is concerned that a Holtec bankruptcy could force New York taxpayers effectively to pick up the tab. So that's sort of the gist of the contentions or the issues that the state has raised in the relicensing proceeding. As explained, those contentions and others raised by the municipalities and by Riverkeeper are still pending before the commission, and that won't change even if the staff provisionally approves the license transfer next, well, Monday, in fact. Happy to later answer any questions anyone has. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. I think there's a lot of very serious concerns about the financial implications. Next up, we have two regional directors for our two senators. We have Megan Glander from Senator Chuck Schumer's office and Lisa Hofflich from Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's office, and they're going to talk about the letter that the many elected officials have composed for a call to the NRC to allow a hearing on the license transfer. So I think we'll turn it over right now to Megan and Lisa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Glander, as Catherine said, and I'm here with my counterpart in Senator Gillibrand's office, Lisa Hofflich, and I know Jerry Shapiro is also on the line, Senator Gillibrand's longtime advisor, just to discuss some of the recent actions that the delegation has taken regarding Indian Point and the license transfer at the NRC. So first, Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand continue to push for transparency and extensive community engagement from the NRC, Entergy, and Holtec, and our teams will continue to work ceaselessly to make sure the Indian Point is decommissioned safely, the community is not financially burdened, and the site, of course, is restored to a state that's befitting of the Hudson Valley, a beautiful, beautiful region. So first, I'm going to walk through some of the Hudson Valley's federal delegation's actions pertaining to the NRC. So before the letter, first starting off in January, Senator Schumer, Gillibrand, and Congresswoman Nita Lowey, who will be deeply missed next year, called on the NRC to extend the comment period for Indian Point's license transfer because 30 days back in January just wasn't enough. You know, thousands and thousands of people will be impacted by this. So we were really happy in February when we were able to extend that comment period so concerns were heard, and importantly, they were on the record, which is very important. Additionally, and this was in the news recently, this year, the federal delegation has been extremely vocal in supporting the hearing request submitted by the state of New York. And we just heard from Josh, been working very closely with them, the town of Cortland, Village of Buchanan, Hendrick Hudson School District, and other stakeholders. I know some are on the line as well today. So I'm going to pass it off to Lisa in Senator Gillibrand's office now to talk more about the letter we just sent.
Thank you, Megan. I would like to also stress that for Senator Schumer and for Senator Gillibrand, who is also a longstanding member of the U.S. Committee on Environment and Public Works, the decommissioning of Indian Point is a top priority for them. And I know that our offices have been in discussion with many of you on this Zoom meeting, and we appreciate being asked to participate. In our various letters to the NRC, the federal delegation has made it clear that we believe that it is absurd that the NRC is greenlighting the transfer of the Indian Point license from Entergy to Holtec without first addressing the pending public hearing requests before the commission that were filed over 9 months ago. The communities and residents that the senators and representatives represent in the lower Hudson Valley deserve a chance to voice their concerns before the commission and have their many questions answered, including those related to how Holtec will use the $2.1 billion decommissioning trust fund that was generated from ratepayers prior to this approval. And in the interest of time, Megan is going to be sending out the various letters that the federal delegation has sent in the chat box. And if you have any questions, we really urge you to please feel free to contact our offices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lisa and Megan. We're going to pause right here and take 1 or 2 possibly questions on the license transfer process. One from Roger. This is a 2-parter. If you do not think that Holtec is suitable, what other companies would you recommend? And have any of those companies expressed interest in taking over the decommissioning? That's number 1. And number 2, if the cost estimates are incorrect, what's a more realistic cost estimate? Do we have that? Has anyone worked on that? I think that's for probably Richard and or Josh.
Well, let me take the first question, which is there are other entities out there. Entergy contracted with a company called North Star at Vermont, and that decommissioning has gone reasonably well so far. There's also an entity that decommissioned Zion Nuclear Plant Energy Solutions. So there are alternatives out there. We don't know if Entergy talked to those companies. Entergy just announced that Holtec was their selected contractor. We believe that's because Holtec offered to take it without any additional money for a non-radiological decommissioning, but that's just speculation. What was the second part of the question?
Is there a more realistic cost estimate if we believe that the decommissioning costs that they have proposed are not accurate?
We haven't done our own cost estimates. Josh, do you have anything to say on that?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that the burden is not on the state of New York or other interested entities, municipalities, or NGOs to figure out how much it costs to decommission Indian Point. The burden is on the applicant. So kind of the thrust of what we were saying to the NRC is, this is in many ways a little perfunctory cost estimates, and we'd like to see more data. For example, we'd like a more thorough characterization of the site. And that's how sites are cleaned up under RCRA, Superfund, or any of the sort of mainline environmental laws. First, characterize, figure out what's there, then remedial work plans, et cetera, and then sort of the cleanup can progress. But it's hard to do that if you're not sure what the initial kind of types and amounts of contamination are. Surely there's a lot of data on Indian Point, but we're not sure that Holtec has all the data that they're going to need to have to really develop a concrete cost estimate.
Thank you. The second question that I'd like for you guys to answer, if possible, is from Hank Gross. What happens if no company is selected by the time Indian Point is finally shut down at the end of April?
I can take that. So Entergy owns Indian Point. Entergy is the licensed owner, well, Entergy subsidiaries, but the licensed owners and operators of the plant. They have applied to transfer the license. If the NRC doesn't grant the license transfer improperly, the license would remain with Entergy. There's no question that the plant would be somehow, without an owner-operator. It would stay with Entergy, and Entergy would have to decommission it in the way that they see fit. Of course, there are two options. One is, and the option Entergy has said publicly that they would pursue would be to effectively mothball the plant and decommission it in a half century, which is right under NRC rules. So yeah, so that's what would happen. Yes, or potentially they transfer it to another entity for decommissioning.
Okay, thank you. Just one housekeeping note: if it's possible, please put your questions in the Q&A. We are monitoring this and hoping to answer questions either in the chat or either in the course of the forum or subsequent to the forum. So thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you to our panelists. This was a lot of information. We appreciate your diligence on keeping track of everything that we could potentially do to make sure that the decommissioning is handled in a way that is best for our communities. I didn't mention when I started speaking that I have lived for a very long time 7 miles away from Indian Point. Last year I moved to 6 miles away from Indian Point. So for us, it's very, very, very personal here in this region. Okay, next up, we're going to have our two state representatives, Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff and Senator Pete Harckham, both of whom have been involved in the regulation and decommissioning of Indian Point for many years. Sandy in her role as an assemblyman, and Pete in several different roles. Our colleague on the Westchester County Board of Legislators at first, then in the governor's office, and now in his elected role as state senator representing the area. So they are going to discuss their oversight, the legislation that they have proposed, creating an oversight board. So Sandy and Pete.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Catherine. Great to be with all of you, with colleagues in government, our NGO partners, and all the sponsoring organizations. Just to back up a little bit, as Catherine said, Assemblywoman Galiff and I have been working on this diligently. Last year, we were able to pass 4 pieces of legislation that dealt with the fiscal well-being and fiscal solvency of the workers at Indian Point, and then regarding different streams of tax revenue going to the municipalities, to the school district, and to our first responders and libraries. So we got 4 of them passed last year in both the Senate and the Assembly, and those are going to the governor, and we'll see how those turn out. The 5th piece of legislation was the Oversight Board. From the testimony of all the prior speakers, that lays the groundwork as to why we needed an oversight board. And certainly nobody trusts the federal officials, not elected officials, but obviously the NRC to safely oversee this decommissioning process. So when we started looking into it, at first it was about a citizens oversight board. And then at the last Clearwater panel, we heard from folks around the country and who are going through decommissioning, and they said you really need boots on the ground, and you need something like what was created in New Jersey with the governor's panel. So that's what we did. We started working on one that would be state agencies that would have relevant authority, as Richard and Josh mentioned, the areas that the NRC doesn't incorporate. So Sandy and I worked with stakeholders on that. We got, at the end of last session, we got some feedback from some local municipal officials. It was very good feedback. We've incorporated some of those changes. We've been contacted by NYSERDA with some of their input. So when session starts in January, Sandy and I will be working diligently to get this reintroduced in the new format, so that we can get something passed. And this is not just for Indian Point. So we're looking globally. there's 6 other nuclear power plants in New York that will eventually be coming offline. So this would be a template for all of those. And with that, I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Sandy, and she can give you more of the details with that as background.
Hi, everyone. I would first like to just compliment this session as well as many others that have occurred, because I think it's given us all a great deal of information, which is so important. And from the previous speakers, as Senator Harckham has said, there's a real good reason why the state has to have an interest in this. This is not just a local issue. It's talking about the Hudson River, it's talking about pollution, it's talking about leaks, it's decommissioning fund, the impact on the roads, the stormwater drainage, DEC, barge transportation, emission standards, all those things. And at the end of the day, if, as the Assistant Attorney General has said, there's not enough money in the account, the state taxpayers are going to take it over. It's not going to be like Buchanan or Cortland or Westchester funding the rest of it. So there is really a state component. And we have amended the bill as we've gone along to, first of all, make sure that we are not in conflict with the rules and regulations of the NRC, and to assure that they have certain regulations. But to tell you the truth, what we found with the NRC is once they leave us and have signed off on a company, they're really not there much. Maybe once a year they do an audit of the decommissioning funds. They do watch the spent fuel rods and pools, but other than that, their obligations are very, very minimal. Maybe emergency planning right on the site, no emergency planning in the community. So we really have a lot to do. What the bill does is put into effect, and one of our amendments is to be sure that the chief elected official of the community is a part of this organization. And it is the Decommissioning Oversight Board. It's Assembly Bill 10236B at the moment. It will be a C, will actually be a new bill. And Senate 8154B, you might want to look it up. But what it does is it actually patterns a lot of what we have already with the oversight board that the governor established once it was known that Entergy was closing, and that closure Indian Point Task Force, run by the Public Service Commission, has pulled together so many of the different commissioners and departments and agencies of the state, and this is what that board is going to be doing. There are 9 people going to be serving on it, very high powered, from the Public Service Commission, the DEC, Labor, the Department of State, Health Department, Emergency Management, NYSERDA, Homeland Security, the Port Authority, Power Authority, and the Comptroller of the State of New York, as well as the Attorney General's office. So there'll be representatives or the commissioners from those, and they will meet at least 4 times a year. They can really meet anywhere. I mean, you can meet on Zoom now. We've all realized that. And they can meet in the locality, they can meet in Albany. It's all going to be taped for public education and public input. But there will also be other people the governor will appoint. I'm trying to remember. The governor appoints 6 people, one of which is somebody from labor, but there can be somebody in the science, technology field, part of the environmental community, organizations throughout the state, which will be very helpful. But we also have appointments from the Senate and the Assembly. And within those appointments, we are requiring that there be local people that are appointed by the majority leader and the Speaker of the House. So the wonderful representation. And, you know, I think we've learned so much that you just can't leave it as just something that's going to happen right. It may not. And we really need as much oversight as we can. And when we started out, we talked about the Public Service Commission having real oversight of this license. And so what we'd be doing is giving the Public Service Commission more oversight of this committee. So we'll be working hard with everybody. And again, you know, with legislation that we have, nothing is ever perfect. And we always come back and amend things after we get them passed, put them in existence. And then, you know, we realize, well, we ought to do this and that. And that will be what will happen. But we will continue to reach out for public input. Just the other thing, you know, one of the bills that Pete was talking about was the spent fuel rod bill. And we want to be sure when a community is losing $32 million in tax revenues, that they have an opportunity to at least get some assessment, not on the fuel rods themselves, but on the spent fuel pool or on the dry cast, so that they could be assessed, and that would be money going to the community, which is very helpful. And the assessment would go into effect when the plant's closed, and it will go out of effect if those rods go somewhere else, which doesn't seem to be a real good possibility at the moment. So look forward to any questions.
Catherine, can I just add 2 quick points? Sandy did an amazing job at summarizing. Just want to mention that one of the appointments must be the chief elected officer from the local municipality, wherever in the state that is. And then, as Sandy mentioned, with the appointments that come out of the Assembly and the Senate, could be other elected officials, but people from the local impacted communities. That's very important to have those voices. And then the other concern, because this is a statewide bill, some of our Republican colleagues from upstate were not supportive because it was just the majority, which is Democratic in both houses, that would be making the appointments. Those communities are largely represented by minority members. So Sandy and I also put into the legislation that the minority leader of each house would also get an appointment. So those folks felt that they would have a voice, and hopefully we'll get bipartisan buy-in when we go back in January.
And I'd just like to answer one of the questions about the fuel rods going back into, are going to be put in cast? Yes, they are, when the plant shuts down next spring, but they have to stay in the spent fuel pools. I don't know, I've heard 3 years, I've heard 5 years. So it will take a while before all of them are into these $1 million dry casts. And the other thing is, I'd like to emphasize too that, you know, the community itself has put together a citizens advisory panel, which I'm on, and I really like being on that. And it's chaired by Teresa Knickerbocker, the mayor of Buchanan, and vice chair is Linda Puglisi. And I really believe that these 2 committees can work together. They have the same focus of protecting everyone, but there's a different way about going about it. So I think both of them can work in tandem, and we'd be better off having both of them in existence.
Thank you. So one question that's come from Joel is, would it be possible to include the Oversight Committee bill in the budget so that it is adopted at the same time that the budget gets adopted on April 1st?
Well, it's always possible. There are some people who think we shouldn't do general policy legislation in the budget. It's really better as standalone. So it's better government, I think, to do things as standalone. But this will be a high priority for both of us to get this done early in the session and not wait until the rush in June. So I don't know about Sandy. My personal preference would be to do this as a standalone, so it has a transparency in the debate that it deserves, as any issue deserves. But we'll try to put this at the beginning and stress to leadership the importance of the timeliness.
And okay, one other question for the 2 of you from DD, multiple part question about what other state agencies are focusing on this issue? What other state agencies have authority to protect through the decommissioning process? And then also once the decommissioning is complete, which I think a lot of us are worried about, making sure that there's sufficient environmental as well as financial oversight of what happens on the site once the decommissioning has ended.
Well, I tried to review all of the various agencies that would participate in this, and I think we did a pretty thorough job. I suppose you could have tax and finance on it and so on, but I think we were really trying to look at the safety issues. We have the controller there to look at what's happening with Holtec and what's happening with the decommissioning fund. So, I think that is one way to do it. I just want to say that we were ready. We've got 27 people on the bill in the assembly, which is a nice chunk of people because not everybody has a nuclear plant. Not everybody's involved in this issue. And I want to thank the advocates because they got a lot of people on these bills. And we were ready to debate it. And I think it would have been, we amended it a number of times to make it better. We were ready to debate it. And I think it would have happened this year if we hadn't closed down session. We would have been debating it on Zoom. Very exciting.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that just from my knowledge of the way that many government agencies work is that, we need to make sure that anyone who has a level of authority, even over a piece of the decommissioning process, is able to assert their authority. This is the protection that we have. And I know, even at the county level, we're looking at that. What can we all do to make sure that there is protection? There was another question about citizens. Sandy, you answered that a little bit, but I think this harkens back to a former question about just making sure that if we have these forums for citizens to be heard, that it's not only just expressing opinions, it's actually things that we can follow up on, and that there's agencies, we make sure that the proper authorities are actually looking into the questions that get raised from citizenry. So I think, that's just sort of how all of us in government need to be very cognizant of. I think.
Well, the intention in the legislation is also to have public hearings, and to have everything recorded, televised, so everybody has their input. And like anything, people can contact others. There will be citizens on this. We're all citizens anyway. There will be citizens on this, and local residents and local officials. And if there's a part of this board that they need to have more scientists, the governor can appoint that. You know what, if we need to in the long run, we can always expand it, but we got to start with something, and we want to start getting it done. It goes into effect in 90 days after it's approved. So we have a shutdown of a plant in April of this year, this coming
January.
So we need to get it going fast. You're asking a lot, Catherine, but maybe we can do January.
It's because I admire the two of you so much and expect that you can do great things. Okay, thank you very much, Pete and Sandy, for always being there for us. We really appreciate all the work that you have done and are continuing to do. Okay, next up on our schedule, we are so fortunate to have a panel of representatives of reactor communities. One of the things I think when the decommissioning started, we realized that we needed to learn from other communities, what their experiences were, where the pitfalls were, where the successes and failures were. And so we've been in close contact, all of us working on the Indian Point decommissioning, with representatives from other reactor communities. So this is an update from what we heard last year, and we're so grateful to all of you for participating in this. So first up, we have Janet Toro from Oyster Creek, New Jersey. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I am mistaken about that. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yes, Janet is first. It's just different in the.
Can you hear me? Hello.
So yes,
Yes.
Thank you, Janet. How are you?
Thank you. My name's Janet Toro, and I serve as the board chair of Clean Water Action in New Jersey. And I'm very honored today to be with such a distinguished panel. I have to thank you for the invitation. I'm quite honored. Okay, so update on Oyster Creek. The plant closed October 2018. Holtec took possession July 2019. It's when the license transfer occurred. We have many of the same concerns that you have. This very complex, limited liability structure, the ability to bring the site back to the way it was before the plant was there. And of course, the fuel, there's over 1 million pounds of radioactive waste at Oyster Creek. The way it stands now is things are a bit in limbo because Holtec and Lacey Township, where the plant is located, which is a saltwater environment on the coast, are sort of doing dueling lawsuits. Holtec wanted to increase their pad site. Currently, there are 34 pads. They wanted to add another 34 and started construction to bring the total to 68, which would accommodate all of the rods that are left in the fuel pool. Lacey Township said, now wait a minute, before you start doing anything like that, you need to have local approvals. So the construction official went over to the plant to see what was going on and was barred access. He was not allowed in. And that's when this whole, court fight started. Lacey Township does still have a court case against Holtec because they believe that they have the authority to give to deny a permit or to give a permit. Holtec has filed 2 lawsuits against Lacey Township saying no, the NRC has ultimate jurisdiction over this. So things are sort of in limbo. In the meantime, there's been various issues that have greatly concerned the community. Have to understand when, before Holtec came in, Exelon always said, we will take about 60 years to decommission the plant. And the reason being is we're so concerned about workers coming in and workers doing this job that we want those radiation levels to really go down before we start any real decommissioning. So that's why it's going to take about 60 years and $1.4 billion to do it. Well, Holtec, when this license transfer happened, said, we can come in and do it in 8 years. We're going to get the fuel pool emptied in 8 years. And we're going to use the decommissioning. The decommissioning fund at Oyster Creek is $960 million. So we always wondered about the discrepancy in those numbers. And our concern always has been that no safety corners be cut, all right, quick and less expensive job. So Clean Water Action did greatly encourage Governor Murphy to resurrect, to bring back, we did have one under Exelon, an independent safety board, and we did feel that it would be very important to have those state agencies like the DEP, the state police, Homeland Security, that those agencies be represented and be included in that board, because they would have the power to do something if there was something egregiously wrong. We haven't had great luck with NRC, and there is, a level of mistrust. So at the end of the day, I think it would be great to have both boards working together, a citizens advisory board and an independent safety board, which the independent safety board was just recently expanded at the urging of Congressman Kim to include the mayor of the town on that board. So that's pretty much where things stand now. I shuddered really when I was watching Richard Webster's slideshow. In which he spoke about the integrity of the company, which is something that I cannot speak to. I don't know. The only thing that I can really say, and I do live near the plant, well, 18 miles, I consider that near enough, is that we really seek truth and transparency, and we don't wish, I want to say this in the right way. We're not wishing for failure. That would be in no one's best interest. It would be really great if Holtec could do this job and do it safely and, get this over with. So we're not hoping for failure, but we want it done safely, and we want to be able to know what's going on, and we want to make sure it's done in the most safe way possible. And I thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm in awe of all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for all you've done to help protect the citizens in your community. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us. And of course, I think we're all with you. We want to make sure that this decommissioning can be done all around the country safely. Every single nuclear power plant is going to close at some point, and we just don't want to be the test case for how not to do it. We want to get the resources in for how to do it. Okay, next up, we do have Mary Lambert from Pilgram Watch. That's a nonprofit that serves the public, and she's been involved in many cases regarding nuclear safety, including Entergy's license renewal application for Pilgram State, and also regarding the NRC's post-Fukushima orders. So she's got a wealth of experience. Thank you, Mary.
And thank you for inviting me. Pilgram is further down the road of decommissioning than Indian Point. So I expect there might be, some hope there is, some lessons to be learned. Where are we in Massachusetts? November 2018, Entergy filed its license transfer application. In February 2019, both the Commonwealth and Pilgram Watch each filed motions to intervene. The Commonwealth had a motion on the insufficiency of funds, similar to Indian Point, and also the insufficiency of the site assessment. Pilgram Watch also had those two contentions and added a third on the character, if you will, suitability of Holtec to do this job, which is rather similar to river keepers. August 2019, neither of us, the Commonwealth or Pilgram Watch, had heard a word from NRC. In August, they approved, nevertheless, the sale of the plant to the two limited liability companies, Holtec Pilgram, the owner, and Holtec Decommissioning International, that would be the operator. In June 2020, the Attorney General signed a settlement agreement, and in so doing, agreed to drop all litigation. Pilgram Watch was not part of that settlement agreement, so we were still supposedly alive, we thought, although we had not heard from the NRC. Just a few weeks ago, in November, the NRC Commission issued an order denying Pilgram Watch's three motions to intervene, with two commissioners dissenting, which is positive. And of course, there had been no hearings, no communication between us and the NRC. We have 60 days to decide to appeal to federal court, because once the commission issues its order, that's really the end of the ballgame with the NRC. What I understand is that you're interested particularly in what happened with the settlement. And could I have slide number 2, settlement negotiations? And the most important part in a settlement is how much, the next slide, how much you bring to the table. Do you have any chips in your pocket to be able to negotiate with? A good example is Vermont. The state of Vermont has the ability to disapprove or approve a license transfer. Hence, they came in to the negotiations with quite a bit of power, and as a result, they walked away with a very, very good settlement. I recommend highly that you read that Memorandum of Understanding settlement because it is very, very thorough and provides both people in government, citizens, with a comprehensive wish list on what you might want, whether you go to settlement or whatnot. Massachusetts, on the other hand, excuse me, entered negotiations with very few chips in our pocket. All we really had was the ability to offer to drop the petition to intervene with the NRC and the appeal before the federal court. There was no pending legislation in the state to offer. And so, although the Attorney General did a bang up job, worked their hardest, what we got was minimized by what we didn't have when we went into the negotiations to begin with. Next slide. The keys, lessons learned, there you are. But we did get quite a few things. But most important, recognize in the settlement that the Commonwealth had, or any settlement anybody has, whether we have a settlement or not, is who signs it. Holtec International, the parent company, the signature is nowhere. They did not take part. And so what you have are the licensees, which are Holtec Pilgram, the owner, and Holtec Decommissioning International, the operator. They're LLC. They came in to the project empty-handed. All they have is the decommissioning trust fund, which taxpayers paid for way back when the power plant went online, and neither Entergy nor Holtec has ever put a dime into the trust fund. That's all they have. So when that $1.03 billion for a one unit plant is gone, they'll be gone, and the Commonwealth will be payers of last resort. But what we got I'd say three important things in site restoration. We got the lower 10 millirem cleanup standard as opposed to the 25 millirem. And we got the conservative dose assessment methodology of the resident farmer scenario and the basement inventory scenario. If you don't have a conservative method for dose assessing, then your standard will be pretty meaningless. So that was very important. And one reason we got that is the Commonwealth knew that citizens were aware of the importance of this, have been advocating for the Department of Public Health, for example, to initiate its own regulations if they didn't get it. And so they knew that this was a high priority issue and hence shows the importance of citizen action. We also got initial site assessment methodology pointed out because there was really no understanding on the part of Holtec on really how dirty this site was. And because of the topography of the land, what isn't cleaned up is going to be in Cape Cod Bay or in the aquifer, which is underneath the site. We also got some money for monitoring from the Mass Department of Public Health and for emergency management for a couple of years. Wasn't a big deal, but I mean, who doesn't need money? And we got a little extra money promised to be left in the decommissioning trust fund at various stages of decommissioning. But if you look at it carefully, and I could send you our assessment of it, it wasn't impressive. We also got a little bit for security for the entity. As you know, the licensees were exempted who asked for it for cybersecurity. So we got a promise for some cybersecurity. It was vague, but at least something. And this is laughable. The new ISFB, I never pronounced that right, storage pad for the 61 dry cash that will be standing up on them vertically. The new pad was constructed 362 feet from a public road. And so the security, instead of having the wall to impede a line of sight attack, we got arborvitae's promises for plantings, which vegetation is not going to deter any attack. We all know that. I would suggest if your spent fuel is going to be on a pad standing up like candle pins for bowling, that you might look into a pad that may be being built to be lower into the ground, so that it'd be more feasible to have a wall constructed. Then that's essentially it. Next slide, please. Last slide. So the finances, bottom line, are this: that the only asset, as I said, of Holtec is the decommissioning trust fund. The cost estimates grossly underestimated what, in fact, the site actually will cost. The settlement, like the NRC, incorrectly has said that more money can become available one of three ways. Going to the parent company, but we know the NRC, nobody can make a non-licensee pay. Holtec International isn't part of this deal. That is why they established limited liability companies. Number two, it was suggested, and NRC says, well, if money runs out, the company can secure a bond, get a loan, but really, who's going to give a bankrupt LLC money? I don't see it. Then the third is recovery from DOE for a breach of contract for not taking the waste by 1998. Pilgram cost estimate indicates that 500 million a year, 500 million in total rather, to spent fuel management costs until it all disappears 2062. However, that money from DOE does not go to reimburse the decommissioning trust fund unless there's a special agreement. Vermont did have a special agreement. And that would be something, if you have a lot of power behind you to get in the settlement, would be very worthwhile. The reality is that, and hence the cartoon, Holtec is going to make potentially, we figure, $800 million on this deal. How? Because they'll pocket the 500 million from DOE, and they might pocket much more as time goes on, and there's no offsite repositories. And we have heard that the company expects about a third in profit. So that would be another 300 million. So I think this explains the interest in Holtec to get into the decommissioning business. So thank you very much. If you ever want any papers or what have you, get in touch.
Thank you. That is, first of all, your slides were really informative, gave us a lot to think about, and we want to definitely learn lessons from the experience at Pilgram. Next up, we have a recording of Mayor Billy McKinney of Zion. He spoke to us last year as well, and I believe that this is a condensed version of that presentation that he gave us last year.
What we've gotten is a lack of transparency. As we go to these meetings and we've asked about the decommissioning process, it's perfunctory steps. We're just checking off the boxes of what we are supposed to do to decommission. But to hell with your time. I find that in this great country of ours an absolute insult and slap in the face from companies that claim to be good corporate partners. That's what decommissioning looks like. There have been other points that have been made by some of our other presenters when I think about our community. Right on the Wisconsin border, we've had a loss in the last 7 years. We've had 150,000 people per year leave Illinois as a result of property taxes going to Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana. So other states benefit from the dilemma that we've been placed in. The other thing, being on the lake, we're also 50 miles, halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. We have a regional airport, so that places us right in the middle of the flight plans. Not like Disney. No fly routes. We have Mitchell Field to our left. I've flown out of Mitchell Field for years for business. I've flown out of Chicago. I'm halfway between them. A regional airport that's 2 minutes from Zion. So let's have a hypothetical situation, which I know people don't like to address. What happened to those casks, those fuel rods that are on a slab right now in the event of a disaster? This is not just a Zion, Illinois issue, it's a regional issue. Our lake provides 50 to 60% of the water supply to Wisconsin. But yet, they don't react to it because it's a Zion, Illinois issue. The Zion nuclear plant, the decommissioned plant is Zion's issue. Well, I gotta tell you, they have an intake pipe that they have left behind. Our shorelines have been eroding for years. When I was a young kid, you could drive down State Route 173, and there were homes and restaurants and businesses on that route. But as the lake rose, erosion, that street had to be shut off. Those businesses and homes had to be removed. So what happens? They've made no provisions, absolutely no provisions to take care of that intake pipe. So what happens if something drastic happens and some of that radioactive material gets into Lake Michigan? It doesn't just impact Zion. It impacts every community to our south, to our north, and to the east. That's what decommissioning looks like.
So those words are very powerful when we heard them last year, and I think it's a good focus for us. You know, I know that there is a lot of information about the Zion decommissioning, lessons learned from Zion. I know someone in the chat has given us some information about that. And, you know, I think that we do have to make sure that we realize that we are all in this together. It's not something that is just, you know, your plant is being decommissioned. Good luck Buchanan, good luck Cortland, good luck Westchester. We all have to, you know, work together in every way that we can. Next up, we have Leona Morgan. She was kind enough to give me an introduction, which I am going to read to you. Hold on just a second. Oops, sorry about this. So sorry. Okay, Leona Morgan is Dene. She's a community organizer and activist who advocates for protection of the environment, human health, and cultural resources from radioactive contamination. Her people have long been impacted by uranium mining, and she lives in a state that's severely overburdened already by nuclear facilities and is now facing the threats of national high-level nuclear waste storage. So thank you very much for being with us, Leona.
Thank you so much for having me today. I just want to start off to introduce myself, how my people introduce ourselves. This is just a formality of our cultural way of speaking to one another and introducing ourselves to our relatives in the universe. So Yata Eshe Leona Morgan Yinshia, Twitch Nishle, Sana Bitli Bashishchin, Kia Ani Dashiche, Twoglini Dashinala. And as Catherine said, I live in New Mexico, which is a place that has been severely overburdened by several nuclear facilities. And right now, we are dealing with a threat from what's called consolidated interim storage. And so I have a few slides I'd like to share with you all to explain what is CIS. And we use this term CIS to refer to consolidated interim storage, which is the so-called temporary storage of waste from all of the nuclear power plants, or high-level radioactive waste for short. So this is just to give you a quick overview, and I want to preface my presentation to say, first of all, that New Mexico does not consent to consolidated interim storage. Despite what Holtec says, we are not welcoming this waste, and we do not see it as something that they claim that we're happy to receive and excited about the so-called economic benefits from this waste. And so this is something that they're saying around the country, is that New Mexico wants it. So I'm here to say we do not, and neither does Texas. And so right now we're dealing with the proposal in New Mexico from Holtec International. They have a site which is about halfway between the cities of Carlsbad and Hobbs. And this is just about 13 miles north of what is known as the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. And that, I want to make it very clear, WIP is a completely different waste site. It takes waste from weapons facilities, and just 40 miles to the east, we're also threatened by a second CIS proposal from the company Waste Control Specialists, which is working with Orano, a French company, in this partnership called ISP, or Interim Storage Partners. And so both of these companies are proposing to take waste from the US, well, as for now, we know that they're proposing to take waste from US nuclear reactors, but the concern is if they might also be importing waste. So Waste Control Specialists is here along the New Mexico-Texas state line. It already has several different types of waste storage, including low-level radioactive waste and other hazardous materials. And so both of these are very close together within what's known as the Permian Basin, which is a place that produces a lot of oil and gas and also has a lot of potash mining. So it's also in an area where it's the geology there is not suitable for these types of storages. The karst geology and also the impacts recently from all of the fracking in the area has led to sinkholes and other situations that just do not make it safe. And then we've also experienced some recent tornadoes in the area. And so this is the place where Holtec is telling you all that they have already secured to bring the waste to New Mexico. Their proposal is to store over double the amount of waste that exists in the United States. So right now we're dealing with about 80,000 metric tons, and their proposal is for more than double that. WCS is proposing half of that. So I just go back a little bit to just talk a little bit about the history of what we're dealing with. I know my time is almost up. So as an Indigenous person, we're dealing with so many other impacts from the nuclear industry. And so if you look at this infographic, it just shows all of the stages of development for nuclear energy. And we have a lot of these facilities in New Mexico already. And as Indigenous people, we see this as a form of nuclear colonialism, which is the ongoing theft of our land, the ongoing genocide of our people through contaminating our food and water sources and our DNA and also our cultural resources. And so just going back into history, as you can see, there's a lot of abandoned uranium mines. And so this is what has impacted my people, who are Diné, also known as Navajo, to some of you who may not be familiar with the name we use for ourselves as Diné. And I just want to show you some interesting maps here. If you can see the deposits of uranium in the United States, where they're located, are largely in the West and concentrated in the Four Corners region, where my people are. And then if you look at this map of all of the nuclear power plants, they're mostly in the coastal regions. And so you can see there's over 100 reactors at the various sites, over 60 sites in the US, but none in the areas where they mine uranium. However, they took the uranium out of the ground, contaminated vast amounts of land, and we're still living with these 15,000 abandoned uranium mines. There is no law in Congress to clean them up. Yet now we're facing the proposal of transport from all over the country to the Southwest. And this would be transport of the waste from power plants by barge, rail, and trucks. So most of it would be by rail, which would mean that all the shipments would go through New Mexico, whether the site's in New Mexico or if it's in Texas, because the railroads come through New Mexico. And I just want to reiterate, we do not consent. We have several community resolutions that have been passed by various municipalities and counties in both New Mexico and Texas. And we have a lot of opposition from all of our elected officials. We have opposition from the governors of New Mexico and Texas. And I just want to point out, one of these letters is specifically from our state land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, who wrote to the NRC because Holtec had claimed that they own or they control the land where they're proposing to build a site. And this is actually not true. This is false. And so this just confirms some of the discussion that we heard earlier as to the way Holtec operates. And so they do not control the land under the proposed site. It's controlled by the state of New Mexico Land Office, which is a split estate. So the surface, yes, they have there's some private land owned by a private company in New Mexico, but the subsurface mineral rights are owned by the state. And so I just wanted to end there and explain just a little bit about where we're at with all of our communities out here. This is a poster from a youth who put it together for an event because we have so many contaminated sites, and as I pointed out earlier, we're overburdened with so many nuclear facilities already without cleanup. And this is what we're asking for, is that we stop bringing waste to New Mexico and Texas, and that we focus on the cleanup and the safety of our communities, whether it's from transport or dismantling and shutting down these facilities. But what we need right now is cleanup, not more waste. And so I want to just thank you all for inviting me here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much. It's a very significant issue. I think that one of the biggest planning failures of the United States government has been to think about the long term, what is going to happen, not only to environmental concerns with mining, but also the environmental concerns of what's going to happen with this waste. And as you say, when we had the community meeting run by the mayor and the supervisor here, Holtec really glossed over their ability to move the spent fuel rods. And I think those of us who've been monitoring the plant for a long time know that that is not going to be simple, and there's no authority to do it at the present time. So it is something that I think we really have to give a lot of consideration to. There's one question for this panel in the chat that I'd like to ask for Mary. What's your recommendations to us for how we can be in the good negotiating position versus the weaker negotiating position?
Well, Richard mentioned that your public what is it, service committee or commission could have some sway. Also, what I've been trying for years to get legislation passed by the state house, and was always unsuccessful because the argument would be you do not have authority. There would be a conflict with the authority safety issues for the NRC. Of course, that isn't necessarily so. But I always said, if you at least pass some bill, even if it's litigated by Entergy at the time or whoever, that's a bargaining chip. And so I get as much in there as I could, even if it's too late. And for local citizens, for their local government, what permits are required? That's another one. So you have to, I mean, any negotiation, whether it's a divorce, I don't care what it is, you have to come in there with something to negotiate with. I have something you want, you have something I want. And if the state doesn't have authority to stop, other than with litigation like the Attorney General is doing, if you don't have authority to, like Vermont, stop the license transfer by voting on it, you don't have that authority. You've got to look at what you have to bargain with. There's the ultimate bargain, like they took was taken in Massachusetts, which was really the only thing they could do, except going back to the NRC and spending another 5 to 6 years litigating, right? Which was done for license renewal. I was in it for 6 years, and the AG was in it for that amount of time too. Is to offer to give up your petitions to the NRC and any appeals you have in federal court. That's what
Leona had her hand up. I'm sorry, Mary. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh,
but
I'm done.
Leona wanted to say something.
Thank you. Just to add, I went through the slides very quickly, but I think this is not necessarily part of the negotiating, but something that you all should be aware of. When Holtec's talking about taking away the waste from Indian Point, there are several hurdles that need to that they need to deal with right now. Consolidated interim storage, as opponents of this project, we have litigation right now opposing these sites because we maintain that CIS is illegal under the current Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And so this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, that we're dealing with a lot of challenges in Congress to change the law to allow these facilities as well as to fund them. Right now, we're not, hopefully by the end of the year, these things don't pass, but I also wanted to mention the Navajo Nation, because of the devastation from uranium mining, we have a law against new uranium mining. This was passed in 2005. And as you know, because of the same issues of radioactive contamination, we also have a law against the transport of any radioactive materials through our lands, and the railroads go right through Navajo Nation. And this is also things that will be challenged. And I think that you all should be aware that the CIS is illegal, and the transportation across the country, besides being dangerous, is going to be opposed. And the Navajo Nation is against this. And this is, you know, within our rights to maintain that we do not allow this to go through our nation. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good bit of information for us to know as we're trying to get into the strongest negotiating position. Okay, we are moving now to the Q&A part of the discussion, even though we've had questions as we went through, and I'm really pleased to formally introduce, not that she needs any introduction, Manager Green, the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater's Environmental Director, the convener and host of this forum. She is also an Ulster County legislator, and she is going to help direct questions that anyone has to the appropriate person. And this is a reminder that this is the time, if you'd like to switch to gallery view, It is on the top right hand of your screen. So Manajo, you start off.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you to everyone. What excellent presentations and really valuable information for this community and the surrounding communities that are potentially impacted. I'd like to welcome some representatives of the more than 40 or 50 elected and appointed officials and their staff that are part of the 185, I think we have participating today. And so we asked James Creighton from Town of Cortland and Assembly Member Aileen Gunther, and also Kathy Talbot from the City of Peekskill to ask some questions. We also have Al Libertoni on the phone. I'm not sure if we'll be able to bring him in to represent labor, but let's start with a question from Jim. You're representing all of these other elected officials that may have questions as well. But Ben, can you pull up James Creighton, please?
Thank you, Manajo. Boy, that's a tall order, but I'll see if I can get a question that's general enough for all of our committees, communities around us. As one of the host committees, the Town of Cortland and all of our neighbors are really particularly concerned about the specific plans to help ensure safe and effective decommissioning. Look, we don't want a quick and dirty exercise. Speed is fine, but it really has to be done right the first time because we only have one chance to get this right. What kind of state or local legislation or negotiated efforts by the New York State AG or others will help us to ensure that the decommissioning activities will be performed to a higher level? And we already heard some talk by Mr. Talent of the New York AG's office of a 10 millirem rate, and I think the same was negotiated at Pilgram in Massachusetts. I think Ms. Lampert had mentioned it, and we want to avoid that federal 25 millirem standard. So, you know, we really want to ensure that there is safety, and we want to really make sure that we can move forward with economic development, and we can afford to invest in housing projects and senior residences or entertainment venues or whatever on the former reactor grounds and the surrounding parcels. That's really important to us, that we get those properties cleaned up and active on the tax rolls whenever that is possible, assuming it's possible.
Let's see. I think Richard Webster or Joshua Talent might be good to start answering that, and then we can have others join in. Richard, do you want to take a crack at that? And,
yeah, I mean,
welcome
there's a
Al.
whole slew of things that we have to do, I think. I mean, the decommissioning, the restoration standard is one. I think we need a lot of guarantees regarding the financial side of things. We need to make sure that if money comes out of the spent fuel, comes out of the decommissioning trust fund for purposes other than decommissioning, it comes back again. We need to make sure that the money that's spent is spent wisely. There's obviously a danger that Holtec will deal with itself, that, you know, the LLC at Indian Point will contract with the parent to do spent fuel management, and that the price negotiations, shall we say, may not be aggressive when Holtec's dealing with itself. We have to make sure that if there's money at the back end, when the decommissioning is completed, that there's an appropriate incentive structure to make sure that the ratepayers get some money back, but maybe also to make sure that Holtec has some incentive to not to price everything up so there's nothing left at the end. So, you know, there's a lot of different moving parts. I think none of the agreements so far are fully comprehensive, but I think, you know, as Mary was talking about, the Vermont agreement has some good features, and I think we need to incorporate those features as well as some more to try to get a really good decommissioning here. I think the other thing I wanted to mention was, of course, the Decommissioning Oversight Board has a lot of good features. That is a very important part of the picture, and we're very grateful to our New York State legislators for putting that forward. And I think that will be very helpful to bring transparency to the table, which hasn't happened at other reactor sites. Josh, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. One thing that kind of comes to mind. So of course, the NRC obviously has authority over radiological safety and cleanup issues, and that authority preempts the state in a lot of ways. But the state very clearly has authority over hazardous waste cleanup. The state can also impose a stricter radiological cleanup standard, which it, I believe, will. And so when the owner, whoever it is, comes to the state, to DEC and to other involved agencies and talks to them about what the standards for cleanup will be, at least on the hazardous waste side of the ledger, there will be, I think, inevitably a public-facing process that will allow for input from whoever is interested, but specifically from the localities. And that will help the state to determine what the parameters of the eventual cleanup will be. So that will be a process that will be ongoing, it will be transparent and public, and I know that that's extremely important to the AG.
Mary, hold on a second. I just want to add one other thing, and that is there's a lot of discussion about what safe on-site storage looks like, and that involves, are the canisters and casks safe enough? Is it a good idea to consolidate them all on one pad, or does it make sense to separate them out in a bermed configuration? And there are many very specific on-site issues, and we hope to bring some scientists to that discussion in a future forum. So, it's not just about the financial risks and liabilities. It's also about the physical and chemical, and we'll bring in questions about monitoring to be so far we've across the country had very little success in monitoring carefully what exposures are occurring during and after decommissioning. So those are other issues that we'll be looking at. Mary, did you have something quick to add?
Yes, two very quick things. The importance of an early environmental site assessment with sampling done by the Department of Environmental Protection and Massachusetts or whatever, Department of Public Health. Split samples and money so they can do that monitoring during the process, because the NRC does not require a site assessment until 2 years before the end of the license termination, and that's a little late in the game. You need an initial site assessment, and you need the ability for the state to assess the quality of the work that's being done.
Thank you. Let's see. I don't see Kathy Talbot. Is she on, or
Assemblywoman Gunther?
And Aileen Gunther? Is Aileen on?
Hold on, Manager. I just got a text from Kathy. She's not able to unmute herself.
Oh, okay.
So her concern is Holtec's corporate structure, the international and the LLCs, as Mary discussed and others have discussed, which appear to offer a lot of opportunity to avoid any negative consequences while giving them the opportunity to maximize their profit.
Who wants to take a crack at that?
Well, as I explained, that's the name of the game. That's why they're doing this. They are not charity organizations. They're in there to make a profit. And as I said, we added up a potential 800 million on children alone.
I'd just like to add, I mean, that's why you need a decommissioning oversight board. I mean, our local communities, that was a question from Kathy from Peekskill. Peekskill City can't ask Holtec about how they're spending money. But we have, I mean, I don't think they can. I guess they can go to court and so on. But by having a decommissioning oversight board, you will have the personnel that are there that will make a difference on that. And whether it's the Controller's Office or the Public Service Commission or the DEC or whatever, that's why the strength of this board is so good. And also, there was a question too, how do the agencies all talk to each other? And I think what's happened with our closure Indian Point task force, the agencies did speak together. That's going to fold as soon as that plan is closed. So we need to have something to get all of our agencies in the state of New York and all of our entities to really focus and speak with one another, make decisions together, and protect us here in the community and the state. Thanks.
So maybe we need a post decommissioning oversight that brings those agencies together. I'm not being facetious, because I think we want to be a model for how to do this. You know, there's so many unanswered questions about what does it look like after a plant is decommissioned for decades, centuries to come. So, you know, maybe that's one of the things that gives us a bargaining chip.
Great. And Al, I see you did make it on to, so please, in the name of labor, would you share your perspective and your question? And you are on mute, just a reminder to take yourself off mute. There you go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Al Libator. I'm a business agent with Teamsters Local 456, and I'm the representative for the security officers at Indian Point, as well as a lot of outside contractors in our communities that work in the plant. And I think we all share the same goal here. Labor, business, or the community is to have a safe, timely decommissioning process. That said, what labor would like is to see labor built the plant. They've worked there all these years. We would like to be a big part of decommissioning, being all the trades involved with the building trades. And I believe Assemblywoman Galoff, you would remember, I think we met over this with Senator Harkman, and there was some legislation proposed, as I heard earlier. I think it's on the governor's desk. But we offer, you know, as far as the building trades, we do project labor agreements, which offers a cost savings to whether it's Holtec or whoever does the decommissioning. And this way the workers who live in these communities, and we have generations of families that worked at the plant for years, fathers, sons, we would like to see that continue right till the end. That local workers, union local workers, get this work. And as far as the security officers we represent, we would like to see them stay till the very end, even after the decommissioning, to guard these nuclear spent fuel rods. Because if anybody's familiar with the training they go through every year, they go through extensive training every year to requalify to be a nuclear security officer. So they're highly skilled, highly trained to do this work, as are the men and women of the building trades. So I don't know, I know Holtec is the parent company. CDI is a company that's a subsidiary, I believe, that's involved in this process. I've had a meet and greet with them before the COVID situation. They were interested in it, but COVID came along and it kind of, we haven't talked since. We had a Zoom meeting, one Zoom meeting. They were interested in talking to the building trades and maybe setting something up. So hopefully, and that would benefit the community. We don't want a lot of workers coming from out of state who don't live here, don't pay taxes here, and don't spend their money here. We would like to keep the work in the community. If possible, we would appreciate the support of our elected officials, obviously, and the community. And then as far as the Teamsters, just so I don't mean to interrupt you, Assemblywoman, we represent several industries, and we also represent a lot of municipal workers around the plant. And we all know there will be tax issues. And we don't know what the future holds for them, especially Buchanan. We represent the highway department. We have members in Peekskill, Cortland, Croton. So we have a lot of people that are going to be affected by this. We met with the Commission of the Department of Labor to try and get them placed in other industries. Nothing's come out of it yet, but it's government, so. But that's what we would like to see. A project labor agreement, and it done all union. And there's benefits to project labor agreements, and the majority of them come under budget and are done in a timely manner. And all our workers highly skilled, trained, drug tested. Every trade in the building trades has a training center, and we have random drug testing for all the trades. So that's what we would like to see, and we think that would be beneficial to the community because these members live in the community.
And Senator Harkman, I absolutely agree with you. We got the bill passed, 10338 Assembly Bill and Senate Bill 7846. Everybody should write to the governor. It hasn't gone to the governor yet, but what it does is try to protect workers, have Holtec or whoever takes over, give first priority to workers as long as they're able to do the job and continue prevailing wage. So it may not be a perfect bill, but it's a good bill and it passed both houses, and the governor's got to do something with it before the end of this year. So, you know, everybody should press for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And also the institutional memory. I think that is so critical, such an important reason to retain as many of the workers as possible and retrain and place in any workers that do have to be downsized. I think at this point, I would invite Roger Witherspoon to start the media portion. Technically, we were supposed to end at 3:30. It's almost 3:50. And I know that there are reporters wanting to ask a few questions. We'll definitely end at 4, but Roger, how about if you ask the first question for the reporters?
Okay, thank you, and thanks for having this. Basically, to Joshua and Richard, what authority does the state have in terms of requiring whoever cleans up Indian Point to remove the radioactive pollutants that have accumulated underneath that plant from leaking water, which also leaks into the Hudson River? The NRC only requires remediation if it affects drinking water downstream. There are 7 communities upstream which take their drinking water from the Hudson, and that's ignored by the feds. So what authority, if any, does the state have in requiring that extensive dredging, which would mean digging into the bedrock underneath, the fractured bedrock underneath that plant?
I can take a crack at that. That's a really good question. I'm not sure I can give you a really, that's a good question. I think the answer is pretty complicated, partially because I don't necessarily have the technical knowledge to talk really intelligently about how we measure radiation doses. But I think I can say, as I've said a couple times, the state, I believe, will be able to require cleanup to a more rigorous standard than the NRC would otherwise require. So that would be a 10 millirem standard. And that would include, I think, all of the sort of dose pathways on the site. So that groundwater, bedrock, all of those things, is my understanding. So Holtec will have to, I think, comply with that standard, which means that they'll have to do what is necessary at the site to ensure that no one on that site would be exposed with more radiation than would be allowed. Will that necessarily mean removing bedrock? Not sure. I don't know. I think some of these questions are hard to answer now because the sort of full site characterization the state thinks is appropriate here hasn't been done yet.
Well, are you aware that plutonium traces have been found in the fatty tissue of deer that were shot around West Valley, upstate New York? and that has never been remediated at all. And the plutonium has been found in deer fat since 1994 with samples every year, and people are still hunting there, and the sources have not been remediated. The NRC does not require it. You know, if that is a prototype, then what can one expect from Indian Point?
I can't really speak to West Valley, which I think is, I mean, it's a federal site. It's pretty complicated. I don't know a ton about it, so I can't really say anything about it. But I think that Indian Point, well, as I said, the state has jurisdiction over the non-radiological cleanup there, and the state will do its absolute best to ensure that all state laws and regulations are followed in the course of the cleanup. That will be, in fact, there's a condition in the contract of sale between Holtec and Entergy that requires Holtec to enter into an agreement with the state that will set the cleanup standard effectively for the site. So in the process of coming up with that agreement, the state will be very clear that all of its environmental requirements be met.
Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead. Ben, I'm wondering, do you have a list of the other reporters? Because I don't have that in front of me. I don't know whether, who to call on at this point.
I believe all the reporters are on right now.
Could you say a name, please?
Sure. Why don't we start with Will Wade from Bloomberg News?
Okay. Will, would you like to go next?
One question I put in the chat. My question is about the trust fund. If the huge issue is that everyone's concerned Holtec is going to underestimate the cost and it's going to cost a whole lot more, doesn't that speak to the idea that the problem here is that there's not enough money in the trust fund to begin with?
Let me take a crack at that. I think the problem we've identified really is that Holtec has an incentive to underestimate the cost of the job for decommissioning, so they can then take money out for purposes other than decommissioning. So what we think is happening here is that because Holtec wants to take money out for spent fuel management, they're underestimating the decommissioning costs to give them the room to pull out a large chunk of money for spent fuel management. So overall, it appears likely, based on past estimates and that are done by Entergy, that the decommissioning fund is more or less at the right amount of money. But if Holtec pulls out a huge chunk of money for purposes other than decommissioning, it won't be adequate. Josh, do you want to say anything more on that?
Yeah, the exemption is troubling to me. So Holtec is effectively Holtec has asked the NRC to allow it to use a portion of the decommissioning trust fund, which is according to NRC's regulations, reserved for radiological decommissioning for other purposes, to wit, spent fuel management and site restoration. Spent fuel management alone, I think Richard had this number in his slide. It's somewhere between $600 and $700 million, at least projected. It could be more. It's a lot of money. So it would be, I would like to see a requirement, if this license does transfer, that monies used for spent fuel management, assuming that exemption is granted, and then ultimately recovered from the US Department of Energy, be retained in some fashion, either in a supplemental trust or in some other vehicle, at least until decommissioning is complete. If there's extra money, that's fine, then Holtec perhaps is entitled to it, or whoever the owner is. But that money, I think, should be retained until the project is done.
Thank you. Ben, could you call out another reporter name, please?
Yeah, let's please hear now from Mary from the Associated Press.
Is that Mary Ash?
Yeah, that's correct. Going once.
Mary, can you unmute yourself, please?
Tom Zambito.
We could, let's move on to Karen from Truth Out, if you have a question, Karen. That's Karen Charman.
We have Tom Zambito from the Journal News.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, Tom.
Hi. I know there's a separate proceeding before the PSC in which Entergy's asked the state to, it's asked the state to abstain from deciding whether or not they can intercede in the sale. But how much, what levers can the state pull, or what power do they have in that proceeding? Can they actually hold up the sale to Holtec? I wonder if somebody could sort of clear up just the authority that the PSC has over this whole process.
Well, I can say that in the past, Entergy proposed a reorganization of the holding structure of Indian Point, and that was rejected by the PSC as financially inadequate. And so the PSC has extensive powers here to supervise, not safety, but to supervise the financials and the suitability of the licensee. Entergy has raised a point about the law under which the PSC operates, whether there is jurisdiction for a closed electric plant. We strongly believe that there is jurisdiction for Indian Point because nuclear plants require so much work post-closure that needs to be supervised by the state, clearly isn't being supervised by the NRC. And so we believe there's a big regulatory gap there, which the PSC needs to step into. So overall, we believe the PSC could either modify the transaction or could cancel the transaction if they see fit. I don't know, Josh, do you want to say anything?
No, that's I agree. I would say the Attorney General does not actually represent the Public Service Commission. They represent themselves. We have submitted comments in their proceeding, as has Riverkeeper and many others. We likewise believe that the PSC has authority under the Public Service Law to review this transaction and that they should use it.
Could they actually preempt whatever the NRC does?
They could certainly come up with a different view than the NRC.
And just a second quick point, is the state contemplating any litigation to in the form of a lawsuit to prevent this from happening at the NRC?
I can say, so as you know, we've submitted a petition to intervene administratively in the license transfer proceedings. That petition remains pending before the commission. Now, this is a confusing point, but just to said it before, just to be clear, even if the staff provisionally approves the license transfer on Monday, as they've signaled they will, that doesn't mean that the commission has weighed in. The commission hasn't decided the petitions that are pending. So the license transfer won't be final until that happens. After that, I can't say. It's a possibility of further judicial review, absolutely, and we'll weigh our options when the time comes.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm looking at the time and thinking that we promised to wrap up. There are so many questions, a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and we will go through them and provide answers and send that to everyone who registered, and then we'll post that also on the Clearwater website along with the recording of this excellent event and the slides and the resource material. It's a very complicated process, and there are so many unanswered questions. I think one of the basic that has been referred to several times, that until they actually do a site analysis, that some of this is guesswork. And then the other is the debate over, for example, how long should high burnup fuel stay in the pools? There's plenty of 40, 30-year-old regular fuel assemblies, high-level radioactive fuel assemblies in the pool that can be moved out to dry storage. And that should be at Entergy's expense, or if there is a transfer, whoever is the owner is supposed to pay for the transfer of the fuel from the fuel pool to dry storage. Many, many unanswered questions, and really hundreds of people across the country trying to get the best possible answers from the scientists. And we're looking into cask and canisters. We're looking into requesting that Congress do a cost benefit risk analysis of on-site storage versus transporting it to interim storage or a permanent repository or repositories. All of those questions are being asked and the answers are being collected on a weekly basis. And we would like to share the information that we're gathering with you periodically. But I think really looking at the safest possible on-site storage, even though safety is within the purview of the NRC, Congress has power over the NRC. Congress is the only entity that can make the NRC comply with their mission. And unfortunately, experience has shown that they don't always do that. So that's why oversight is so needed. I think at this time, I'd especially like to thank Catherine Borgia for doing such a wonderful job of moderating, and all of our presenters. And any last words before we close?
Thank you, Manager, for organizing this. This is so informational. I think we all really learned quite a bit.
And more to follow. You know, that's our job, and we take it very seriously. And thank you to everyone who helped organize this. It was a real team effort, and we'll move forward trying to leverage the best possible oversight. And one thing I want to suggest while I have your attention is that if money could be set aside to engage experts that the Decommissioning Oversight Board might need to engage, and also even someone to facilitate it, administer it. And I'm not sure where that should be put in the budget, but if it became a budgetary issue, it could be decided in January. Just a thought. You know, brought forward in January. So with that, I wish everybody stay well, stay healthy. Thank you, Leona from New Mexico, and for taking your time, and each and every one of our speakers from around the country and from the community. Be well, stay safe, and to be continued. Thank you.